And now, please welcome Ingenico ePayments Global Head of Travel, Eric Liebman, Head of Travel Solutions, Lori Gablehouse, and Product Innovation Lead, Herjan Ndivalo, for a conversation moderated by Skiftex Creative Strategy Director, Matt Heidkamp.
Hello and good morning, everybody, or good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Today, I'm really excited to bring on our panelists from Ingenico ePayments to talk about reimagining global payments to strengthen travel's recovery. We have a 45-minute session here, so a lot of ground to cover. And really, I think what's key is that we're not just talking about the technicalities of payment, but really as a foundation to unlock customer experience and build a better customer experience for travelers as we go into the future. So welcome, Eric, Lori, Herjan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So first off, where is everyone joining us from today?
Florida.
I'm in Texas, where it's very wet.
I'm from the Netherlands, Amsterdam, where we just had our last bit of summer yesterday, and I think now we're in a 6 months winter. So really sad we can't travel to get away from that.
Awesome. So welcome, guys. I mean, this is a great showing, really how global this forum is. And I really want to sort of kick us off by talking around, from your vantage point, how the global payments landscape has changed in travel, and maybe what it means specifically for different sectors.
Okay.
So let's kick that over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Matt. So I think without question, every segment of the travel industry is revisiting how they deliver their products and services to the customer. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's obviously unfortunate that it took a pandemic to get us to do this, but it's not a bad thing in that we're all kind of re-looking at how do we provide these services that we probably haven't changed a whole lot in decades, to be honest, right? And because of the nature of the pandemic and everybody moving towards a more touchless and less kind of, interrupt points in the journey, payments for a change actually has a seat at the table. And I say for a change because traditionally, and I was, 20 over years in the hospitality and airline business. And so I know that payments was generally thought of as a very transactional thing. It was very much of a back office thing managed by the finance folks or whoever. And now we're finally seeing where we actually have an opportunity to bring that up front and say, that payments is really an integral part of the guest experience. And that's a new paradigm for the hotel and for many other industries, really all of travel, airline, OTA and all, because really payment was just considered a function again, whereas now we're saying, it's not one size fits all in payments. If you're in South America, they are very much of an installment type of payment process. If you're in Europe and the many different flavors of bank transfers and whatnot. And so you now have an opportunity to say, well, we can look at our customers and how do we want to serve them in a more individual, more sensitive basis that we can say, how is it that they want to pay for this product? Because that really should be the driver rather than saying, okay, well, here are the few, brands of payment that we offer, and this is what you get to use. So I think this is a great opportunity now for us to say, let's look at payments as part of the integral, guest journey or customer journey, and how do we facilitate that with the many different flavors there are out there that customers are showing preference for.
Yeah, and I would add from the hospitality side, we've been talking about this for a few years. I've been the co-chair of a committee that we call the Guest-Centric Payment Group. And the reason we created that group was because we realized that there were several challenges to centralizing or managing the experience associated with payments because of the different systems, the different processes, and certainly to Eric's point, the different stakeholders in making those decisions from one end of the supply chain to the other. And I do believe that what has happened now is we actually have a moment in time where we can kind of pause for not necessarily one we wanted, but it's one we've got. And to make lemonade out of this lemon, I think this is the point in time where you go back and you think about payments, especially from a different perspective. you know, if it's from the perspective of the person buying your service or paying for a room at your hotel, have you really thought through the different steps and the different links in that supply chain to understand what could and should you do differently coming out of this?
Yeah, and especially for hospitality, who are maybe a bit slower in that curve of digitization compared to, for example, the airlines. It's really also now about looking where can we take a traditionally very much hands-on payment experience of giving your credit card to the person at the front desk, and can we make that a contactless payment? Can we maybe even make that a digital prepayment or a digital check-in up front? Partly because of health and safety concerns today with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think we're realizing now as an industry as well that you can actually take that and bring that into a more innovative, more guest-centric user experience and actually give that choice to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that that our segment here was really sort of between our two main deep dives today, which was on digital transformation and contactless travel, because payments really does bridge those gaps very nicely, I think, especially now when we're seeing the needed rise for contactless travel from a safety and hygiene perspective. I mean, I think even prior to it being a necessity, I think customer preference was probably going that way as well.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, to that point, this is also not new technology, right? This has been around for a long time, and I think that that certain segments of the industry have embraced it more than others. But really, I think the advent of being able to do a very seamless touchless experience has been around for a while. And I'm glad to see that we're now focused, and not surprisingly, we have a lot of the larger travel companies and suppliers coming to us to ask, you know, how do they manage this? And I think to the point on the slide here that the natural sort of thinning of the herd from the pandemic has left a few players standing who really are global processors who really understand the travel business. And I think in our case, you know, we come from the travel industry itself into payments, not the other way around. So we're able to provide the guidance and I think really the expertise to these companies to say, okay, we get that this is it's a very disruptive change because certain areas of the business have never really embraced, I think, the true kind of global nature of payments, even though they're global businesses. So this is really giving us now the opportunity to say, hey, this we're not like creating this bespoke. It's really out there, and here's how we apply it, and here's how it really benefits, you know, the stakeholders, the owners, the actual, you know, users themselves, and certainly the end customer, by having this more kind of relevant thing that says, hey, that's cool. And I think to that point, I always kind of bring up my two favorite payment experiences. Really, one is, of course, Uber, which really changed the game, right? It made payments invisible, and by that, it made it really cool because it was like you could say, well, that's great. I click, I get in, I leave, and I don't have to do anything. Or if you're in store, like an Apple store, where there's no concept of queuing up to, you know, at a cash. It's just everybody is a you know, cashier kind of thing. So I think they're really, to Herjohn's point about innovating the payment landscape, you can do this in a way where it's not a toll gate, but it's really kind of a cool part of the entire process.
And are you finding that more of your customers, some of your travel industry partners, are rethinking the way that they talk about payments or what it really means to them? Or is it early on in that conversation, or has everyone sort of wrapped their head around, you know, the possibility of what it unlocks?
Well, I'll certainly add to that. But Laura, I think you're certainly on the head now, you know, chair. So you've seen the growth of the attendance of these kind of meetings where you used to gather a few people, then now you fill a room. So I guess that in itself is certainly indicative, no?
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, especially in the Zoom era that we're in terms of conferencing and video conferencing. There's a lot more attendance. Certainly people are sitting in one position so they can dial in and make sure they participate. But I think that the true interest is in not only the educational aspect, but understanding the process behind the process. You know, as I think there's efficiencies to be found in understanding that supply chain and understanding to the point we made earlier about, wanted to make about cash flow. I mean, where is the money? Is it, if you've got a customer and you've now had to cancel something or close down something, or you've caused change. I don't think change was something we focused on previously, that maybe 80% of our travelers or our guests showed up for whatever they booked. But now that obviously went pear-shaped and upside down. And now you have to understand change. And what did you learn? This is your moment in time to understand, what did you learn about change? And I think one of those is, if you don't have the money, you're really not in a good position to help your guest or your traveler. So that supply chain is even more important than ever for all of us to understand, what role do we play in it? And is there something about that that we would like to change?
Yeah, and I think the interesting shift you're seeing in some of our client interactions is that more and more people in the business side of our partner companies are experiencing that payment is not just something for the finance department or something for the payment geeks in the company, and it's not just the very complicated topic that you have to do to move the money, but it's actually an essential part to how you operate your business, to Lori's point on cash, and how you manage disruptions, etc., in a situation like this, and to how you manage your guest experience or your traveler experience. So it's so demystifying that complexity for our clients.
Well, I think that's a great segue here to sort of talking a little bit around the implications of what payments can really do in terms of the business side and the traveler experience. And so as we're preparing for this session, I've taken some notes just on some points that I found fascinating that you guys talked through. And I would just love to hear your perspective on some of the points that we have pulled up here, whether that's how we approach airports right now as travelers and the sort of woes of navigating that, or being forced into a very controlled payments environment in the front desk of hotels, or even how we talk about quote unquote alternative payments. So I just love to get some of your perspectives on these topics here.
Well, I'll kick off with the herding. I think that was I actually heard yesterday some fantastic speakers. A lot of the airline CEOs, as you know, were on, and one of the things that I was really excited about hearing was that they are kind of conceiving of what their passengers really like and dislike about travel, and obviously no center seats and things being spaced out, and I think airports is just one example. If you take the travel experience in general, really it is very much of a herding type of experience, right? Because if you're traveling internationally, you're herding up at immigration. And if you're in a hotel, you're herding in the lobbies. And if you're in an airport, you're herding in the departure lounges. And if you're in a cruise, and so et cetera, et cetera. So virtually everywhere you go, there's this kind of crowd situation that's happened. And I think that probably going forward, even post-COVID, I think we're all learning that, well, we really don't like crowds, and nobody cares to, queue up for hours and hours on end. Other than the British, apparently, who love traffic. I learned that when I was living there. Yeah. But other than that, I think generally speaking, right, it's kind of this rock concert experience virtually everywhere you go and travel, and I think that having tools to streamline that for the industry is really important. And as I said, none of this is really new, but I've certainly, when you travel internationally a lot, as we do, and you see the different realms of the experience, you realize it can be done better. So certainly smarter apps that have using tokens to store securely your payment information, for example. Systems that allow you to prepay, so you're authenticated and you're paid before you arrive at a hotel, so that you could use a QSR code, you could use other forms of authentication at the property to get your key or get it right on your phone. Certainly airlines are showing us that they've done it for years, but even now I heard Maya Liebman this morning talking about American with their applets that they're doing at airports, that now you don't even have to interact with a kiosk. You can actually just scan your phone, and your phone acts as the kiosk through a mini American Airlines applet. And I think that this is really kind of wonderful how all these parts of the travel experience are now being automated. And in taking away all what I call the toll gates, right? That you don't have to stop at immigration. Now they're doing it with a scan of your credit card and your fingerprints, and you don't have to stop at a hotel. You can do straight to room. You don't have to stop at an airport. You can go right to gate. So we're enabling all these things. And again, behind all this is none of this really happens until there's a point where the payment has been received. So if we have this, well, let's authenticate the card, but then charge you later, then I'm again creating that toll gate. If I'm now creating full prepayment and I can authenticate you as part of this process, then I've now removed that impediment to the flow, and you're just able to go continuously. Right. So I'm encouraged by that new mentality of let's take that hurting out of the whole experience.
Right, and I think that's the thing that's great about this conversation here is we're not talking around, this great new technology that hasn't existed before. It's really more of a mental shift of how we talk about how we implement and how we value customers along that experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw a question in the chat around ancillaries, and it made me thinking to what Eric said about Uber and how payment is so seamless for Uber. If an Uber app can automatically know how long the taxi ride was and charge you the moment you leave the car, why can't an airline, by storing your payment credentials up front, why can't they not immediately charge you for an extra bag if you checked in 3 instead of 2? And so why can't we make these experiences more interactive? And I think it's a matter of taking that idea of payments is as a key part of your customer experience, and we do it in a way that's not legacy, just pulling a credit card number at the moment you're engaging with your customer, but really keeping a token, a way of storing the payment credentials of your customer, and then having that seamless experience.
Yeah, I think you can see the shift in the channels as well, in terms of there's a convergence of some sort between what you are doing on a B2B level, what you're doing on a B2C level, and how maybe you're starting to converge the two of those things and move enough data along that path so that the experience to that end user, to that consumer, becomes more seamless. I think that is some of the value that's coming out of people looking at what they are involved in from whatever part of that chain they're in, and figuring out how they can either share better or index better, whatever the technology is. But there is technology that will help all of that. I just think we've, as an industry, depending on which industry you're in, it's very fragmented in some places, and finding ways to put that together is, again, another thing that we've worked very hard at HeadNet to create some new frameworks for these things. But I think the airline industry, honestly, was best suited all along for it, because 30 years ago they created central clearing. But the concept is still the right concept, that you have to find a way to know where the money is, who's in charge, and then make sure you tie whatever changes, disruptions, or other things like refunds, vouchers, all of that, then you can understand what you can deliver to the consumer when those things happen. But you really do have to get down to some of the nuts and bolts to figure out. Mm-hmm. And again, alternative payments is just a wonderful choice in some ways, because it's cash in many cases. You've a bank transfer, one and done. You know where the money is. So all of these little things start to add up when you start to look at your entire experience from end to end.
Yeah, and I really love this topic of alternative payments as well, and I'd really love, from a global standpoint, to get your perspective on, maybe how different regions are approaching alternative payments. What the difference is between alternative payments in America versus Europe or Asia. I know, this is really sort of a big can of worms, but I think the way in which we approach alternative payments is always sort of secondary. But how should it be rethought?
Yeah, and I think step one in that, if I may, Matt, is to no longer call it alternative payments. Because to what extent can you call it alternative if in China everybody pays with WeChat Pay or Alipay and the credit card is almost not used? I look at the Netherlands as well. 85% of the transactions we're seeing in the Netherlands are with a local bank-based payment method called Ideal. And people only rarely take out their credit card. And if they do, it's mostly for travel, because that's actually where they don't have the option to pay with Ideal. So what we're trying to do internally is more to stop thinking of it as alternative payment methods, but really about local payment methods and taking a payment experience that used to be sort of global, one size fits all, into how do you handle these markets each very locally. And like, for example, in many places in Asia, it's about mobile wallets and QR codes, etc. For a market in Latin America, it might be about paying up with installments. Mm-hmm. And I think having a partner and having a payment setup that's sufficiently flexible to allow you to deal with that takes that makes sure that you don't have to necessarily account for that complexity.
I think if you asked me a year ago if QR codes would still be around, I would have said no. But I think the pandemic, wow, it's just really exploded. You're using QR codes for everything, whether it's a payment or whether it's a menu at a restaurant. So,
but Matt, on the alternative payments, when I have these conversations with a lot of these travel suppliers about alternative payments, and it's very much of a chicken and egg thing, because they're very prevalent in certain markets, but to Gert-Jan's point, in travel they're not prevalent at all still. So it's kind of like a lot of suppliers may say, well, the numbers are small. Well, the numbers are small because no one supports it. But I give them an example of an in-store version, because in digital we're blind, right? We don't see the customer. So I say, imagine now you run a very high-end fashion boutique in Paris somewhere. Or more sublimely in New York, because it's more of an American mentality thing, I think. And a shopper from overseas comes into there, and they have a great experience for half an hour. They wine and dine champagne, they get all this stuff, and in the end, they've got a whole selection of kit worth who knows how much. The sales girl says to them very politely, that'll be $24,000 for all this stuff. And then the customer, who may be from X, pulls their phone out and says, oh, can I pay with this? Pointing to an app on their phone. And the salesperson says, well, no, sheepishly, and says, do you have a credit card? And they say, well, no, this is how I pay for stuff. And then the sales girl has to say, wow, I'm really sorry. We can't accept that. And now that friction, that really awkward moment between the customer and the salesperson and the brand has just been massively tarnished. And they know about that. Now take that to the online example in the digital realm. With shopping cart abandonment, we don't know the reason always why people left, and there's a lot of data that supports the fact that they don't have the payment method that they wanted, so they leave. So now you've created again this kind of friction, and even though it's not face to face, it's at a person on your website or on the app that can't continue the transaction because you don't support their type of payment. So again, to Gert-Jan's point, that we call them alternative, but really they are just the many different flavors of payments. So creating that friction is just never a great thing for a customer. So in the reimagining, it's all about embracing. So we talk about inclusivity. Well, let me tell you, inclusivity also includes the many, many flavors of payments that are out there, because many of them are culturally driven, right? Americans, we love credit cards, but many Europeans, Asians, and other cultures do not. So I think this is a great way to sort of be inclusive, to say we respect the fact that you have a way that you prefer to pay, and we're going to accept that because, hey, you're our customer and we want to talk to you.
Right. Not just forcing whatever the corporate headquarters office is using for payments.
Right.
And so I'd love to sort of put some of these ideas into reality now and talk a bit about a case study here. Or just, in general, how brands can start adopting some of these thinkings. And so I wanted to switch over this slide, and I sort of pulled it up here, and I am not expecting anyone in the audience to actually read through this, but I just found it so interesting as sort of a way to begin this discussion in terms of what brands need to be looking at. And so, Lori, I would just love to hear you to maybe talk us through what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of, if you can think about sticky notes, so yellow sticky notes, and you're sitting in a room brainstorming, you're like, well, we've never had a payment strategy, so Good. What is that for us? What does that mean to us? And you start putting a bunch of sticky notes on a whiteboard with a lot of good ideas about, well, this means this, this, and this. And you think about it from the different channels, the different sales aspects, you know, whether that's your website or maybe you've got a mobile app or airport or in person, whatever that interaction may be. And then a lot of these ideas come out and you start to use them to create that strategy. You know, what can we then sort through and sift through to accomplish what should be something every corporation has, is how do we get our money? I mean, not again, where's your money? Is it in your pocket? Is it in somebody else's bank account? You know, and your strategy around how you're driving that revenue and how you're maybe going to be more efficient in how you process the money, you know, in terms of centralization maybe, and bringing that money into a central point and then dispersing it to your local suppliers or properties or, you know, whatever that case may be. So this for us was a new airline. They were brand new. They had no idea how to do this from ground zero. So we sat down and went through this with them. And Viva Airlines today is a very good airline and now has obviously a roadmap and a payment strategy wrapped around that and people that they've hired to make this happen. I think that again was one of the findings, that not in all cases do you have the right stakeholders. So people, not just in treasury, but people from marketing who care about your revenues and how you're converting payments, you know, your conversion rates, like Eric mentioned earlier on your website. I mean, how is that working? And then obviously you need some technology. So in my mind, there should always be three people at the table making decisions about priorities and roadmap around payment. You should have all three. You should have the marketing people who are trying to drive your revenues. You should have the treasury people who are probably paying the invoices and need to find the money when you get it and reconcile it. And then you've got certainly the technology side of that, which can help make this entire thing more efficient and more user friendly to everybody.
And so obviously this slide here was very specific to Viva and sort of identifying some of the challenges and key opportunities there. But we also pulled together sort of 6 key takeaways. If you know, we don't need to backtrack on everything, but is there anything here that really stands out to you in terms of what our audience can be thinking about as they look to reimagine payments?
Well, I think to that point, once you get all the little fragments together, you can start organizing and grouping them, and you can probably, the first 3 will come out of several of those initiatives. You know, you've probably got some problem somewhere, whether it's technical or drop off on your website or whatever it is. But in the end, whatever choices you make about what you're working on probably fix a problem that you've identified. Maybe that, again, is technical, so it's stabilizing things so that you've got redundancy. And then the optimization to me is, again, understanding in that supply chain, where is the money, who's got the money, how are you getting the money into your bank account and reconciling it, and then how do you manage changes around that. All of those things, once you start working your way through the list, you'll come out of that with all the payment opportunities that you want to work on in the near term and long term. I mean, out of that slide came a 3-year, probably in most cases would have been 5 years, but they were a small airline.
So you sort of need that full audit and brain dump before you get to the actionable steps there.
Yeah, there's several actionable steps. You know, it's always the low-hanging fruit. Everybody wants to go after that first and figure out what that is. A lot of this can be fixed with just process and procedure that you just never identified before. You know, do you have the right policies in place for refunds? Do you even, you know, I've seen several changes in the last 6 months from airlines and hotels and everybody, OTAs around, you know, how can I go on your website? There's probably an FAQ now that tells me how I can get credit. There's something in terms of a form probably where I can submit something to get a credit. So everybody's had to very quickly reimagine refunds. So
Mhm.
I think that's a really good example of, gee, if you can do that in the course of a month or two, then really you can do some big things in a very short period of time.
Absolutely. And I do want to get a couple of final thoughts as we look into 2021, and then also get to some audience questions here. We do have a lot of great ones coming in. But what's going to drive booking throughout the rest of 2020 into 2021?
Yeah, so I would love to say that digital payments are the absolute linchpin upon which the rebound is going to occur, and we're directly responsible for bringing the industry back. But of course, we're not. But I do think we're a big supporting element for how things go forward. And again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, talking about the kind of levers that we need now in order to make people feel safe, in order to make the journeys, depending on whatever area of the travel industry you're in, feel like they're respecting what's going on, and even post-COVID about personal space and whatnot. But I think that the opportunity now is to look at the entire spectrum of that customer experience, right? And how does it go from beginning to end? And we like to say at Ingenico that nothing really happens until two words appear on the screen, and that's payment approved, right? So everything is literally aspirational until your payment is approved, unless you're paying cash, of course, right? And so we want to take that experience and that enablement of the journey and turn it into something that is, I think, really supportive of the fact that we have to respect social distancing and being touchless and everything else, but very much to work with the industries and them with us to say, okay, how does this new experience going forward become more innovative, more now post 2020, right? To where people can do things automated, where the apps and the websites are smarter and they're a little bit more intuitive on how we do things. And now that, again, with the advent of the token, again, not a new thing, but we can securely store credit card and payment information very securely, to where we can now, instead of having to again stop you along the way, just go back and refer to that and be able to pull payments, so that your journey doesn't have to stop along the way with all these different pieces and parts that may come up throughout the journey. And I think that as we look forward to this emergence again in the travel industry coming back up, I like to think that we've embraced all this in there, so that customers, no matter what part of the travel industry they're actually engaging with, will have kind of a newer and a little bit more frictionless experience across the board.
And I know that this is a point that we're about to get to on this slide as well, but we do have an audience question here that asks, can the group speak a bit more about centralizing payments and how their product helps in the end-to-end process?
Do you want me to do that one?
Sure.
Okay.
Go for it, Laurie.
All right. So I think centralization is key. If you think about it in the airline world, the airlines honestly have done this for 30 years. They've had a central clearing for when a travel agent takes a payment, how does that information get to the airline and how does the airline collect that? They have an entire ecosystem around that. Other industries can take note of that. They're certainly not going to mimic it. It's way too late for that. But I do think from the hospitality side, we've done a great job with creating a framework that will enable the ability for something that was collected on a website somewhere, for that data to then move in its own payment related way in terms of instructions and details that are specific to the payment, to actually move along a rail that makes sense for payments, instead of what we've traditionally done is said, oh, we're just going to follow the booking. So follow the inventory and bolt on some payment data to it, which is really what has gotten us into trouble and made it difficult for anything other than 16 digits to really work well. And I think that is where we have opportunity to centralize things. In other words, if you're a hotel brand, if you can move the money into a central account and then separate that step, so the collection from your consumer from the payment to your property, and similarly from OTAs, they've done something very similar for years, where they've used virtual cards or bank transfers to they take the money from the consumer and then they push the money to the supplier. I think you need to start breaking down your payments at that level, and centralization of that main step of the money from the consumer versus the money to a supplier level is the key to the whole linchpin of that process. And again, if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. So I not throwing this down saying, oh, that's really easy. It's not. There's a lot of treasury and current and tax and currency implications to making that happen, which again is why it hasn't happened quickly. But if your volume of travel and sales is down a bit, then anything you implement in terms of new processes or things that require training or development, now is really your moment. Now is your moment.
And to follow on that, I think to Lori's point, the airlines, I think, got this right many years ago with the BSP process and others. And I think that some industries, some parts of the industry have probably done it better than others. Hospitality is a great example of, I think, where centralized payments would really make the ability to do prepayment across the board, similar to the airlines, quite feasible. Because one of the impediments, I think, up to now and why the hospitality industry has been, I think, reticent to go there is because if you think about a large chain, you've got thousands potentially of properties in different countries with different rules, different banks, different acquirers, different currencies, different payment methods, all the things we've been talking about. And I think it's been sort of a point-to-point type of mentality now that I have to do everything specific to each hotel, each bank, each country, et cetera, rather than the hub and spoke system, if you will, of centralizing, saying, okay, if I'm one of the large mega brands and I now take this all in-house, to Lori's point, when you separate this out, I don't have the complexity anywhere near as much to now be able to settle to each hotel in their local currency, because the ultimate, the optimal, I guess, transaction flow would be that the customer pays for their payment in their local currency on their credit card, and the hotel receives their funds in their local currency in their bank. And at the end of the day, relationships are very important, of course, but the hotels survive on cash in the bank, right? So centralizing this allows the industry to have anyone from anywhere book anywhere within the system, and it's all kind of brought into a central point and then dispersed from there. And I think that that's something that I'd like to see the hotel industry embrace more, because that would then enable this very seamless, transaction, so that a guy in Singapore can book his hotel in Paris for a US-based hotel chain, right? Irrespective of where they are.
Absolutely. And I do want to try to get to one more audience question here. And I think you may have alluded to some of that in your answer here, Eric, but what differences do you see between consumer to business payment method preferences versus B2B? And also, just to add on to that, do you find that how a traveler from a country wants to pay for a hotel, airline, OTA mirrors how the hotelier wants to pay their own partners? That was a mouthful, but hopefully. So are there differences between C2B payment methods versus B2B? Or is that sort of out of the purview here?
No, I think so. I think they're very distinct. Certainly, B2B payments are their own animal, and I think that they are viewed differently by the industry because and I guess by B2B, I don't know if they're referring to an OTA to a hotel or a hotel to a supplier, or I guess there are different interpretations of that. But generally speaking, I think they've been very segregated. So the C2B stuff has been traditionally, I pay for a product through the app or website or call center, wherever it's going to be, and then the money is then sent to a particular, either to an airline banking accounts or to a hotel or to an OTA or wherever it might be. I think that again, as we've been talking many times, that's remiss in kind of embracing the full spectrum. I think B2B is probably less relevant in terms of needing alternative payment types. I think a lot of those payments have traditionally been things like bank transfers, virtual credit cards, even check if you're talking about supplier or corporate to travel supplier, whatever it might be. So I think they're still very different animals, and we look at both, and we certainly service both. And I can tell you that the B2B is generally far less complex than the C2B stuff is, which embraces. Laurie, go ahead. Sorry.
And I would just add that the main difference in my mind is anonymous versus a contract.
Yeah.
There are things that when you have a contractual relationship that you can do better or differently versus something that's more anonymous and you're just trying to move data from one point to another so it can be actioned upon at some point.
Mm-hmm. So let's have maybe one more quick one here. So when it comes to localizing payment experiences, can you give a good example of what a travel company should do? For example, in China.
Loaded gun.
It's a bit of a loaded one, but let's see if we can answer in the next two minutes or so.
Yeah, I think some of it are basic steps, right? I mean, everybody thinks of, if I want to target the Chinese market, I need a website in Chinese. I need to set up customer service, etc., that speak Chinese. But I think the next step is then actually, as to Eric's point earlier in the conversation, have then that Chinese consumer also have the opportunity to pay. And be it with the local payment methods like an Alipay, like a WeChat Pay, but then really fully integrating that in your process, being able to then also offer refunds, also offer flexibility on either your tickets or on your bookings. And that doesn't have to be a big step. I mean, you can start. What I find really interesting in this COVID-19 pandemic is to see, for example, small SMB restaurants, etc., really quickly switching to deliveries and to digital payments, and suddenly just sending out links to collect payments. So what we have actually seen one of our clients, and that's not an SMB, that's a major airline, actually switch to sending out links, for example, to take local payment methods in countries like Brazil or others in Latin America. And then that means they get the value from that localization immediately while they do the investment to then automatize it and scale it, taking advantage of sort of these lower volume period that we're in.
Well, all right, guys. I think we're just coming up on time here. But thank you so much. Any sort of final thoughts? I do want to just play this video that you guys had produced as well to sort of outro us here. But any sort of final thoughts as we look into 2021?
Yeah, I would just like to sum up by saying, first of all, thanks for having us here, and it's great to be on the forum. And if I'm a travel supplier now, what I'd be thinking is reach out to someone who really understands this stuff, who is an expert in both travel and payments, who understands the really end-to-end concept of the customer journey. Embrace the different nuances of the places, if you're a global business or even if you're a local business, of how people pay, and think about payment as an integral part of your customer strategy. Yeah. And then I think you'll be all set.
Well, absolutely. Eric, Laurie, Ercan, thank you so much for joining us today. That's it for us. We're going to queue up this video, and please go check out Ingenico's showcase page. You can learn more about them, see some resources that they have available, and encourage everyone to reach out to them individually as well.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Ingenico makes travel payments simple, so travelers can pay however they like and create memories wherever they are. Open up a new world of travel with Ingenico e-payments.